You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestall. Hey there. Well, I hope none of you have sore heads after a long week of Independence Days and National Days in North America, with Canada Day on July the 1st and obviously Independence Day on Saturday. So I trust you're feeling better and probably regretting how you feel for another year. So welcome back to Mysteries and Monsters. It's episode 75. And to celebrate another milestone, I'm delighted to be joined by the marvellous Linda Godfrey. Linda first appeared on episode 31, and that show is still picking up listeners, so there's no doubt about her popularity with you guys. Linda has just released her own film, Return to Wildcat Mountain, so we discuss the phenomena behind this award-winning documentary and the cases included inside it. It's a fantastic film, and we believe it's coming to Prime later this summer. Linda's last book, I Know What I Saw, is also about to be released as a paperback, so we dive into some of the chapters in the book and cover strange air crashes, UFO sightings, Bigfoot, ABC, and dire dogs. It certainly won't be 44 episodes until Linda returns, so keep your eyes peeled for one of our Halloween releases. All of the links we mention are in the show notes too, so you can follow them up after the show. As for myself, I guested on a friend's show, Confusions of a 30-something, which was a lot of fun and should be out later this week, so I'll share it on social media. Check them out. The show's more of a social discussion show, but hey, we talk about monsters, so I hope you enjoy it and drop them a few downloads. Okay, so the t-shirts are live on TeePublic and Redbubble as of now, so if you want to rep your love of the show, then send us a pic if you pick one of them up. Our Patreon is also about to have another exclusive interview drop in the next few days, so to join in the fun, win exclusive Patreon prizes, and hear Patreon-only shows for just $4 a month, the link is in the show notes, and we're also across all social media platforms, and you can subscribe to the Mysteries and Monsters channel on YouTube. Before we join Linda, if you've not seen the new reboot of Netflix's Unsolved Mysteries, I can't recommend it enough. The first episode is chilling, the third episode is beyond perplexing, and the fifth episode will blow your mind if you don't know much about that particular case. I'll not say any more, but the only thing I've got to say is I don't think 6 episodes is anywhere near enough, so I would hope it's a big success for Netflix and we get some more shows as soon as possible. Once again, thanks to my brother Dean for his artwork as always, and to Brennan Storr for producing this week's show. Now, let's welcome the wonderful Linda Godfrey. For our 75th episode, I'm delighted to welcome back one of my favourite authors and investigators, and clearly a guest my listeners enjoy as well, the marvellous Linda Godfrey. With almost 30 years of investigating strange things, it seems that life shows no signs of slowing down for Linda, with both the documentary Return to Wildcat Mountain, now available to stream, and the paperback release of their latest book, I Know What I Saw, hitting the shelves later this summer. Linda, delighted to welcome you back. How are we?
We're great, thanks. And thanks so much for having me back. That was a great beginning show way back when we were saying it was almost a year ago.
Yeah.
Or more. It's amazing that it's been that long.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks again. It's great to be back talking with you.
No, I always, as I say to any of my guests that come back, that's enough for me. Yeah, it was back on episode 31. So yeah, here we are. Like I say, nearly a year later, and it's lovely to have you back and have a chance to speak to you again. So, as I said in the introduction, Linda, you've been rather busy since we last spoke. Obviously, I know most of your energies have gone into the marvellous documentary Return to Wildcat Mountain. So, I know we touched on this last time we spoke. Hillsborough seems to be some kind of epicentre for these weird sightings, Linda. So was it interesting that you were able to kind of go, I can't believe that I've got this on my doorstep, this needs to be explored further?
Yeah, that was really pretty much how it was. And it's again, seems like a series of coincidences, which in the long run, probably are not really coincidences. But I happened to meet a gentleman some years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, who had been a newspaper editor and writer in Hillsboro, Wisconsin. Now, Hillsboro is a teeny tiny town. I don't know if the population, I'm just going to take a wild stab and think it's something like 1,500 or something. It's not a very large place. It's very charming. It's set in this very hilly area called the Driftless area. And that is the place where somehow when the last glacier headed southward, it sort of parted away from this little area and didn't clean it off smooth. So it's got all these hills and valleys. You'd think you were in another country. And so that's always fascinated me. And the reason I know about it is because one of my grandmothers lived in Hillsboro, and I spent a lot of time there in my childhood. My other grandmother lived maybe about 18 miles away from that. So they were both in this real strange, rugged area. And I'll explain this first because it kind of provides the setting. The strangest thing about it is that there is a 20 mile long range of strange, it's pink quartzite. It's a rosy colored quartzite. And the earth that it is originally compiled from is some of the oldest dirt. Give you all the oldest dirt. It's some of the oldest earth in the whole world on the planet. And being quartzite, everybody knows that quartz is a mineral that is used often in things like radios and other things that need high conducting materials. And that's basically what this is. You've got this huge reef of a very ancient rosy quartz, kind of surrounding this little area. It's almost right in the center of Wisconsin. Just west of Baraboo is probably the biggest town you would find near it. And when I was a kid, I just loved going there. We would, every night after supper, my grandparents would take us on a ride just to look at the hills and valleys, and it had this it's kind of a small mountain. It is an actual mountain, but it's a small one called Wildcat Mountain. And it had been called that ever since settler days. And you can drive around and around it like in a spiral, and you end up at the top, and you can just look for miles and miles over this landscape. And so it's just a gorgeous place. But of course, as a child, I never had any idea there was anything that weird about. Well, when this gentleman called me, his name is Stephen Stanek. He had written something that and sent me a letter about something. I can't even remember what the topic was exactly. But when I wrote him back, I said, well, Stanek sounds like you must be part Czech. And Stanek is a pretty common name in the Czech Republic. And my grandmother that lived there was Czech. She came on a boat with her parents when she was just a little 2-year-old girl. And that led to even more weirdness. But he said, yeah, he was a Stanek, and there were lots of Staneks, and so we started corresponding. And he started sending me reports of unknown black panthers. Panther's sort of a misnomer I won't get into right now, but a lot of people call them that. Other people insist that they're wild black mountain lions or just big cats. So there's a lot of controversy over what they're called and named. But he kept sending them, and he would fill entire newspaper sheets with like 1 or 2 paragraph reports on these creatures. I mean, it was amazing how many they were just in this little 18 mile radius of Hillsboro. And finally, and I didn't really know exactly what to do with them other than being glad to have them and read them. And then I thought, well, I'm enjoying these so much. And even though people don't think of mountain lions as cryptids or unknown animals, and they probably for the most part aren't, but the mere fact that there were so many, and that oddly enough, well over half of the reports were of this black variety that are supposed to be, according to area indigenous people, their legends say that these black ones are not always just earthly animals. They can be spirit animals. They can go back and forth to the spirit kingdom, along with Bigfoot and the Dogman and all these other guys. And so that does lend this aura of mysticism and local tribal, not worship, but awe and respect for these animals. And also it gets sometimes into the shapeshifter type thing. They're supposed to be able to shapeshift. So there's a lot to them.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, Linda, because I've noticed quite a few people when certain people report these sightings, and for people like ourselves, I think we certainly do consider them to be cryptids. But I think, especially in America, because you have such a well-established population of mountain lions towards the west of the country, and obviously you have the jaguars and such like crossing over from Mexico into the southern US states. I think some people seem quite blasé about it. They don't seem to understand or comprehend what's so unusual about this, because at the end of the day, for most people who look at it in a kind of ambivalent way, they probably assume that, you know, these are just black mountain lions and it's nothing special. But I think the aspect of this is twofold. Is that these animals are appearing in areas where officials say they don't live. There's no proof of
right.
this. That everybody is mistaken in what they're seeing, and it's not just, well, it might be. It's a flat out no. It seems from Fish and Game and the other authorities. But also you've got this aspect of the majority of these sightings are of black cats, and melanistic cats are very rare. So that's the thing that I find intriguing about these sightings. And obviously the same thing happens here in the UK, and you have it in Australia as well, which is another country, such as the UK, where we don't have a population of large cats. In the UK, our largest cat is the Scottish Wildcat, which is extremely rare, even in this day and age, Linda, with conservation efforts to try and reintroduce it into the Highlands of Scotland. So one of the things that struck me, and I think it was Stan that mentioned it in the documentary, was that he was flatly shut down about this, and most of the witnesses, when they report it, seem to be flatly shut down, even though these are experienced outdoorsmen, hunters, farmers, whatever. These are people who know their locale. They know what's supposed to be there. It adds another layer of suspicion to it all, because it's one of two things, really. They're either there and the officials don't want to admit it, or everybody's losing their minds. Would you say?
Yeah. So, I mean, some, probably get almost to that point, because they're so frustrated. Many of these sightings, probably most of them, have been seen in daylight, at fairly close range. They're walking across people's yards. In fact, the latest one we had there in Hillsborough was a very large black melanistic cat that was walking across the yard of one of the town's barbers. And he actually had his barber shop right on that spot, right on the very edge of town, right in the liminal spot. Liminal is the place between here and there where nothing exists, but then it does. And that's a really good test for whether it's in my experience, for whether it's something highly unusual from elsewhere or just a regular cat type thing. But he sat on his porch, and he said it walked across his backyard, maybe 20 feet from him, never looking at him or bothering to acknowledge that he was there, and slipped around a little garage and never saw him again. And I was up there, so I left a trail cam up there for quite a while. Wasn't fortunate enough to get anything, but yeah, it's just, and of course he said people made fun of him or whatever, and that's actually the basis for the book and the next coming book too. I Know What I Saw. this is exclaimed by people who are just so frustrated at having had a clear sighting, having sometimes have it stop right in front of their car. Many different. Sometimes there was an Amish man who was up in his tree stand, and one walked right out of the tall grass. He actually had two different sightings. I think it was one black and one tan. So it's just very, very hard to go to an authority and, wanting to be a good citizen, report what you saw because you know there are maybe children playing in the vicinity where it was seen, or some other good civic reason for it to be reported, and then you're just laughed out of the place. There was one young woman, she's actually shown in the film, who was planning to go into some sort of arm of law enforcement for her career, and she was doing a ride along with one of the area game people. Fish and game people on Wildcat Mountain, and she said they got up to near the top when they won't even admit the tan ones, and a mountain lion stepped out with a cub, and they just stopped and took it all in and were kind of just entranced by it. And later on, she saw the warden again and said, "Say, I'm going to be telling about what I saw in this book." And she was actually threatened with her career prospects if that appeared, which it did. So it's taken, and you just wonder, why is it possibly that unusual that no one should know or tell anyone? And it was okay when it was just her, when it was just the warden and the person who was going to be following that career, but then they didn't want anyone else to know. It's just kind of baffling to me.
Yeah. I mean, having looked at a lot of these cases, Linda, and you've spoken to these people who have, we're not talking about fleeting glimpses. People are having, full-on experiences with these creatures. And this refusal from officialdom to kind of accept that this is going on, why do you think the reason is for this? Is it that they're terrified that there is going to be a serious incident where a child or an adult is going to be taken down by something? Or is it that they don't want to admit it because they don't want loads of hunters to turn up with guns running about the woods everywhere? Or do you just think that they don't care?
Well, I think they do care, probably for both the reasons you mentioned and for many other reasons. I think they care because in some cases they don't even believe these things exist themselves. There's also a money thing involved. If it becomes an acknowledged animal that is having broods of, that is multiplying, put it that way, in the state, then the state has to declare it, a protected animal, and there will be collars needed, and tracking, and more time from the agents. And these days, when government funds are tight, that is something, and then they also, maybe it does put some onus or responsibility upon them if they are supposed to know that these things exist, that if they have just put it in writing that yes, that these big cats are here, and then something terrible would happen, then maybe part of it would be on them. There are all kinds of little reasons that you can think of if you're trying to figure out why they don't tell anybody, but it's still very, very maddening to those who have seen them. And it's also hard for us to just admit that there's something in the world we don't get. And even my own husband, who was stalked by a large cat, it was a mountain lion for sure. We saw the footprints. He was stalked by one in our own yard before we moved to the house we're in now. We were on the edge of a state forest that had lots of steep drop-offs that again were created by that were created by the last glacier. where it was kind of the opposite of the quartzite thing. It plowed right through and left all these deep things that were nicknamed kettles. And my husband went out, and we had like an acre to cross to get to the backyard where his boat was and his tool shed. And he went out at night without a flashlight, and there was quite a large, or good-sized anyway, mountain lion waiting for him back there. And it did its growl, and he knew what it was. He's an old farm boy from that area, but had never faced one of these before. And it paced him. He had to walk backwards across our whole yard without falling down. He was waving his arms and yelling at it, and it was making that snarling kind of yowl. And luckily, just as he felt it was going to pounce, he reached our deck. And the deck of the house was probably enough for the animal to be kind of frightened of it, because they don't know what decks are. And so he got onto the deck, stumbled into the house, where I was doing exactly what I'm doing now. I was sitting at my desk talking to somebody in a podcast or radio show with my headphones on, and if it had killed him and dropped him down into that steep place, I never would have known what happened to him. He probably would have gotten dragged off, and so it was real close. Well, I saw a smallish cougar about a month ago killing a house cat when I was out walking in the place we live now. And I saw it plainly. It was daylight. I was not that far away from it. The only thing that was keeping me there watching was that it was in a position of a kind of a marshy drainage area that runs around the whole city. So it was down below me, and I didn't think it would risk what it was eating, but I could hear the house cat screaming, just screaming. And this was daylight, and other people were around, and nobody was paying any attention. And that's when I looked down and saw it, and I could actually see this thing holding the house cat down with one paw and pulling like tendons or something out of it. And every time it did that, the cat would just totally scream. And then when it saw me, when it was aware that I was standing there watching it, trying to take a picture, of course, the only thing I really got was the house cat screaming sound, just for various reasons. It stopped, it dragged the house cat out of my sight, it came back, and then I could see its entire body. It was using its back legs to flick big gobs of mud from where it was, and then it left again. And it was gone. And he did not want to believe me that I could have seen that. I took him back, showed him the footprints, and we took, and there were piles of dung, or whatever you want to call it, scat. Yeah. And the mountain lion scat is pretty unique compared to most others. So he was convinced, but he still doesn't like me to talk about it, because in his mind, that can't be. What happened to him can't be, and me seeing that smaller wildcat couldn't have happened. That's just, it's something in our human nature. Nobody wants to admit it.
Yeah, very true. I mean, it is intriguing, I think, and the one thing that struck me watching the documentary, Linda, is that the people that you speak to and feature in the film seem almost relieved to be able to talk about it.
Yeah.
Without, I mean, there are a couple of people who once again, as you mentioned earlier about the lady who was doing the ride along, who were flatly told by officials, no, you didn't see that, you didn't.
Right.
And they're going, well, I know exactly where I saw. No, you didn't. And I'm frustrated on their behalf for that, because these people aren't saying they've seen Bigfoot or a dogman. They've seen a flesh and blood creature that lives in the North American area. It's not that uncommon in certain states, and yet they're being made to feel, in some instances, as though they're reporting seeing a unicorn.
Exactly, yeah. And you might have noted on the film there was one gentleman named Paul, who is a former sheriff's deputy, and he was told he saw one, and went in and reported it to the office, and it was a large one. He was able to describe it very well. He had a good look because he was in a squad car, and he was told he did not see it. They just, like you said flatly, no, you did not see that. That is not what you saw. And he is just like, yeah, I know what I saw. I'm a trained observer, and he was eventually, for that and other reasons, it was just the attitude is so despairing to people who have had the experience, no matter how long ago it was. People who saw it when they were children will remember it just as well.
I mean, I'm always struck because there's a very famous incident that happened on a cryptozoological show that came out just at the beginning of the century, which was called Animal X, which I think is on Prime. I'm not sure if it is in America, but it is in the UK.
It was. I've seen it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's a very famous episode where they go looking for Australia's mysterious black panthers, as they call them down there. And the one thing that struck me about that was that this guy was convinced that the officials were covering it up, and he said, we can prove it. And they got some lion scat from a zoo and sent it to them, to the officials, and said, can you check this, DNA check it? And everybody knew it was lion scat. And the report came back and said, yeah, it's dog. And they went, well, we just want... So then they went back and said, well, we've got it on film that this is from the lion at the local zoo. And they wouldn't respond after that. Didn't want to know. Wouldn't talk to them again. Said, no, sorry, we're not helping. And that alone, for me, just gave the whole thing credence, because if you're sent something that you know for a fact what it is, and then you get a result back like that, the only determination you can make on that response is that they're lying.
Yep, exactly. And that's a great example. And I actually have been able to, once I really started looking into this and studying the animals and learning what the scat looked and that kind of thing, there was an incident that happened that's talked about in my first book, The Beast of Bray Road, it was. There was a woman in southeastern Wisconsin staying in a cottage at Lake Geneva that had something walk over her head, and it had a little thatched roof. It was a very quaint little building, and scared her dogs to death. And there were, you can see, I took photos of it. I had to go over there and stand on a ladder because it had gone to the bathroom on her roof as she was below, and then it jumped, made a big leap down to the gravel below, and both times they were too big for most dog prints, and it was hard to tell if they were bipedal, so I was a little reluctant, but I figured it had to have been a bipedal wolf-like creature. And now I know better. I actually got on she had a bar stool. I stood on the bar stool, and she gave me a box, and I scraped off the scat that was up on the roof, and I took it right to one of the nearby agents, wildlife agents, and he told me that it was raccoon. He said, yeah. He said the raccoons, they like to pile up all their scat, and make a big heap of it. Well, I've never seen a raccoon do that elsewhere, but of course that was what I accepted. And I know now that it was a mountain lion. The way it jumped, the size and shape of the paws, but I wasn't studied up enough on that because I hadn't heard that much about it myself at the time. That was back in 2000, the year 2001, something like that. And so I think there are problems also with people sometimes misdiagnosing, or they'll just tell themselves they saw a black dog, or that it was a large wolf or wolf dog, which those occur too, and there are bipedal wolf-like creatures that are seen. But at that time, that was what my mind was on, and I wasn't aware. If I'd had a little more awareness, I might have known even then. But it's interesting how sometimes our minds influence us to see what we want to, and occasionally with these creatures, I think with some of the wardens, their minds influence them to disparage what they don't want to accept.
I mean, like you say, it sounds like it's a number of factors that are causing this kind of, I wouldn't say ignorance, but there seems to be a professional attempt to kind of discredit these people, or encourage the perception that these people perhaps aren't the cleverest, or they might, as is often for anybody that sees a UFO, they're clearly drunk or high, Linda.
Yes. Yep, exactly.
Now, I've spoken to medical professionals, and they've said most people, to get that drunk that you hallucinate, you are essentially on the verge of alcohol poisoning.
Right. Right.
Now, are we really to expect, and I'm not suggesting that people don't drink, but are we supposed to expect that every single person that's had one of these experiences is a super functioning alcoholic?
Right. And that they all see the same thing.
Yeah, well, exactly. They would be seeing all kinds of things. Surely they'd be seeing gnomes and fairies and UFOs. They wouldn't be seeing black cats.
Pink elephants, giant caterpillars, anything. But the fact that it would be like a unified hallucination if everybody was seeing this. And I've been spoken at seminars or conferences where I'll tell the audience, not that I'm implying any of you are big drinkers. I tipped a few when I was in college, that kind of thing. But how many of you ever will admit that at one time or another you had a few drinks too many? And really, usually like 75% of the hands go up. And then I'll say, okay, now please tell me how many of you who have admitted having a drink or two over saw a large unidentified animal of any kind. And nobody raised their hand. Nobody ever raises their hands. The only response I really ever get is this one is kind of great, from a farmer out by Bray Road, who said, well, I know I was really drunk when I was driving home. I shouldn't have been, but I was. And how do you put it? When I saw the creature, I sobered up really fast.
Yes. Yeah, things like that tend to shake the alcohol out of your system, I suggest. Yeah,
it's like a big slap in the face. Like, oh, there's a giant canine-like thing that's going to eat me. That tends to, just snap you out of it, I think.
Absolutely, and it's one of those things that there's a very notorious skeptic who I saw earlier this year on television basically accuse everybody at the Hopkinsville incident, which involved 5 children under the age of 12.
Oh, sure, they start drinking young there, right? Yeah.
And basically, his whole argument about that was, we can't believe them because their testimony could have changed. But then he was quite happy to put forward this perception that a policeman off the record had told him that the bin was full of beer cans. And I was just sat there thinking, are you seriously sat there saying that this house full of women and children, they were all blind drunk?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that I just find offensive on a variety of levels. Not the fact
Very
that it's
much so.
being dismissive, but it's this kind of, well, what they say is wrong, but what this person who I think is in a place of authority, they must be telling me the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And then to perpetuate quite a damning slur on these people, I thought was disgusting, personally.
Yeah. I think that's kind of shameful behavior. And I mean, there are misidentifications, and probably mountain lions is one where it does happen a little more often, because especially with the tan ones, because they can vary a lot, and it's hard when you see one lone figure stalking through a meadow of grass, how big it really is if you're just seeing it against the grass, or in kind of a changeable landscape. It can be difficult, but that's the same with any of the creatures. I'm sure there is an occasional bear that is mistaken or a Bigfoot that is mistaken for a bear, but that doesn't mean that these creatures don't exist. I've seen those with my own eyes, and they could not possibly have been bears.
Yeah, absolutely. Or we've suddenly discovered that there's a whole population of bears that have decided to start walking about bipedally, because there's a very famous clip of a famous bear, I think it's in California, who was known as Pedals, because it had damage to its front paws, so it had to walk about a lot, because simply walking normally, as a bear should do, was obviously quite painful for this poor thing. And that seems, it's one of them, well, if that's doing it, that's what it is. So apparently America and Canada are full of bipedal bears, which if you think about it, is as scientifically groundbreaking as the discovery of a mystery hominid, surely.
Right, exactly. And the act of walking upright is not a supernatural thing on its own. I mean, people or mammals of any type can walk upright, and lizards, and if you think about it, birds, and so there are a lot of creatures that walk upright. But when it comes to mammals, they don't unless they're trained for it, or there's something special, or they're sick, or their hands got caught in a trap, or their paws, I should say, got caught in a trap. There's a reason for it, and the reason that they don't normally is because they're not built to. Their spine and neck, if you look at the anatomy of, say, a bear, its spine and neck and head, and even though it walks flat-footed, its feet and legs are still designed differently than humans. And you put it next to a human, and you can see how differently it's put together. It's not meant to. They don't have actual shoulders like humans do. They're meant to be on 4 feet, and that's what they do in most of their ordinary lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And usually bears will go bipedal when they're in attack mode as well. So
right, they'll rear up.
Yeah, most of these people, it's quite distinct. And like I say, especially in the world of Bigfoot, a lot of people that have these experiences deep in the middle of the woods know exactly what a bear does, know exactly how a bear acts, know exactly what a bear sounds like. And they never say that at all.
Right, right.
And it's the other aspects of this whole black cat phenomenon I find very intriguing, especially in the States, is that there seems to be quite a lot of reports of them being in pairs. And I know you touched on it earlier, Linda, in regards to there's usually a black one and a tan one.
Yeah, very often, or a mix of the kittens. There'll be a black kittens with the tan kittens, and it just seems so likely that they are pairing up and mating. Now, they're not supposed to be compatible mating. But if you watch our documentary till the end, you'll see where there's a wildlife expert who keeps he has a great cat or big cat rescue place right just east of Hillsboro, just outside of Baraboo, Wisconsin. And he's not like the Lion King guy, on TV.
Yeah.
He's much more sober, down to earth. He and his wife do this as a service.
Yes.
They really love the animals, and he has a lot to say on that subject. That and his position is that sure, they may not normally mate, but if there are no other mates around, and they can manage it physically, which the mountain lions are a little smaller than a jaguar, but they're pretty close in size and everything. That he believes that you could get a hybrid, and he has He has ligers and liligers, which are matings. It's also always been thought that a liger was not able to mate again, but yes, we have one that did reproduce, and it's called a liliger. So there's a lot that is possible that kind of like in the movies they say, life will always prevail.
Yes.
In Jurassic Park or something like that.
Yeah. Life finds a way.
Life finds a way. That's it. Yes. One of the best quotes from Jurassic Park. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean I find that frustrating as well, because obviously, as you mentioned about ligers and tigers and lions crossbreeding, it's not usual because obviously they live on separate continents, so they don't come into contact with each other unless they're in captivity. And yet they tend to build a symbiotic relationship, and you end up with ligers. But you get that across the animal kingdom because obviously horses and donkeys create mules, and mules are supposed to be sterile and unable to mate. But that's happened in the past, and you only look at reptiles who can develop without mating. Now, I'm not suggesting that certain breeds of mammal are acting in that way, but I don't understand why that would be a surprise, because at the end of the day, they're big cats, regardless. The gene pool isn't going to be that bad.
Right.
And once again, this falls into this aspect of the hallucination or mistake, nobody's reporting seeing lions running about. Nobody seems to be reporting tigers running about or leopards. It's the same type of creatures. It's a black or a tan or a black and tan pair, or with a litter of cubs or whatever. There doesn't seem to be any kind of over-exaggeration, Linda. Do you know what I mean?
Right. They still look like normal creatures, but not something too exotic.
Yes.
And that's despite the fact that what we've learned lately in all types of biology is that animals are have this amazing ability to kind of spin off a mutation for one thing or another. One thing I've learned is that among many mammals, like dogs, raccoons, it's fairly common to have a mutation for being completely furless, and that's how you get these the blue dogs down in Texas that people call chupacabras. But they were really a combination of mating with a type of coyote and dog, and then this mutation came in for the furlessness. And so, science has opened up quite a few possibilities, as much as people's sightings have. But it's just astounding. And then it's interesting because we also documented that these creatures, especially the black ones, had been around for a long time. They weren't just something that had fallen off the last circus wagon, because the Native Americans had they revered them as a type of mystery cat that could come out of the freshwater streams, which is where most of they were considered the spirit world bridges, and that they could be mystical animals when they wanted to, and return to those things. And it's documented in a lot of the animal effigy art, of which the southern half of Wisconsin abounds in these low relief, huge flat sculptures of different types of animals. And you'll find the lynx, you'll find the mountain lion right along with all of them. And these date back possibly 1,200 years or so. So they've been around. And there's also legends about it. It's linked with something called the water panther that battled with the thunderbird in order to keep the earth and the sky and the water all in balance, so that you wouldn't get crazy weather destroying the crops or anything like that. So it's been around a long time in our native theology. And then you go back to some of the settlers' writings, like Laura Ingalls Wilder has a large chapter in Little House by the Big Woods, where she tells about her grandfather coming back on a horse from town at night, and a black panther starts trailing him from the trees, jumping from tree to tree, and finally jumps on him, and he barely makes it to a little log shelter house that's there, and somehow survives. But that's going back to settler days. So
I mean, one of the things that always makes me laugh, especially in the States as well, Linda, is these are often there's like a continual explanation for this, is that in 1890 a circus was coming to town on the train track, and there was a horrific train crash and they escaped. Did you get that put forward as an explanation? Because I've seen that put forward for an explanation for most strange things in the States in regards to big cats.
Yeah, they try that. I mean, there were 2 kangaroos that were seen out in western Wisconsin about 10, 15 years ago, something like that. And people were this kind of turns it to the other way, because people were saying they didn't exist, they were from somewhere else, they fell off the circus wagon, whatever. And also there was a long growing legend statement that so many cryptozoologists made that they never found one of these kangaroos. And I tracked down 2 incidents where they were found in different homes. One was actually a wallaby, I think, and the other one was a kangaroo. And the wallaby was run over in the driveway of the culvert he was staying in over in western Wisconsin. And the other one was given to the zoo in Madison, Wisconsin, where it lived for a number of years and then passed away. So it is. There are a lot of people who keep exotic pets.
Yes.
You can't kid yourself that way. It's amazing really how cheap they are. And if you've got an acreage where it's far enough from other cities and so much size, in Wisconsin, I think you don't have to pay anything, or it's legal. It's legal to have these animals there, so they can show up. But the majority of them, just when something is doing something that is obviously not from this world, in the way that it acts, and in the way that these animals sometimes act, they'll just disappear. That's the most common one, is that they're like the predator, kind of like Bigfoot is said to do. They can just make themselves disappear, and you're looking at them 1 minute, and then the next second they're completely gone. They do have great powers of just sort of blending in with the landscape that they're in too. Mm-hmm. So there's, I'm never trying to shoot down or denigrate anybody's sighting in any way, because I've had the experiences myself. But I think if you're going to call yourself an investigator, you have to keep it real when it is real and know the difference. And that's why people are sometimes disappointed. They'll say, well, how should I start out? There's this land, that I want to go walk in and find out if it has anything. And I said, well, first of all, you have to study what people know are there, because you can't mark it as unusual if it's something that's going to be there, and you need to sort of prepare yourself. If you're just walking in someplace with bears, you want to at least have some bear spray or something like that, and you want to find out where they appear and know the lay of the land. And I just want to go and see a dog man standing up. Well, so does everybody.
Yeah, definitely.
And usually the ones that see it are just the people who live there, who haven't got a camera with them, somebody who's around a lot. And these creatures seem to, even just going in and out of the same driveway at the same time every night seems to be enough to get some of these creatures curious enough to go and have a peep at who's going through their territory all the time. That's how it seems. But you have to start looking with the things that are automatically there. And I guarantee there are not there haven't normally been, you just can't put it off to mundane animals that well over 150 large mountain lions, both of tan and black colors, have gone through this little teeny area of Hillsborough in, the past several decades, and say, well, that's just normal. That's because, on the other hand, people are saying, no, it's impossible. You've got between impossible and normal. Mm-hmm. And so seldom does that happy place arise where you can say that, yes, we saw it, but it did something or other, so we knew it wasn't, what anybody would call a regular animal.
Yeah. I mean, I found it really perplexing. The biggest mystery about this isn't these people claiming to have seen what they've seen. And,
right.
Like I say, most of the witnesses had a damn good look at these things, Linda. It's not like it's corner of your eye, or it's, as you say, a lot of these sightings are quite close up. A lot of these sightings were in daylight. There's footprints, there's scat, there's animal carcasses left in some, because there's one particular guy who says it looks like a bomb went off. There's just blood and fur everywhere, wasn't there? In one of his paddocks, I believe. And yet, why is it such a concentration seems to be occurring here? Is there any particular reason? Do you think it's the terrain? Do you think it's one of those areas that, yes, there's a small town there, but other than that, there's not much else?
No, and I do think the terrain has a lot to do with it. It would be considered a mountain lion's paradise, because it's, some people have called mountain lions river cats, both the black ones when they're seen and the tan ones, because they follow rivers. That's where they're best. The food they like best is found. It gives them all the water that they want. They can blend in usually really well with whatever's around there. And there's a rolling terrain that they can, sort of hide themselves rather quickly. And sounds a lot like the same land that Bigfoots are said to prefer also. But anyway, that Hillsborough is like that. It's just, and the other thing is that mountain lions like to attack. They have two ways. One is to run and jump at the throat and just lock onto the throat of whatever it is and bring it down. The other thing that is probably more preferred is to have a slight height, like a tree or a cliff, a rock cliff, and this whole area around Hillsborough is full of rock cliffs. You would swear you were in Montana to walk around through it. It's just so different than regular Wisconsin, and so they'll wait patiently on these cliffs, or just kind of if they know something's there, they'll just sit there and suss it out until they can get a good jump at the right angle. And they can jump. I've read that they can leap like 20 feet in one leap if they so care to. And they can also jump from tree to tree. So that having the trees and the rock cliffs and things greatly aids them in their hunting.
Yeah, absolutely. And big cats are known for climbing trees with prey as well. So not only are they...
they'll drag it right up. Yep.
Yeah, obviously that's one of those genetic imprints that certain animals have, Linda, that they just seem to know what to do with things. They don't get taught it. It's just a natural reaction to getting prey and finding somewhere nice to sort of chow down on it.
Right.
And that's always an interesting aspect of it, because there is only one predator that does that, and that's a big cat.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly.
So that alone shows not only are they super nimble in regards to how high they can jump, but also they are incredibly strong to be able to, climb a tree whilst holding something in their mouth to go and eat it.
Yeah, and they can actually drag something that weighs more than they do, along the ground. And what they'll do is, this is something I only learned like in the last year. Some facts about them are so obscure that you don't find them till you get really deep into them. But they will take, how a mother kitten or a mother cat drags a kitten by, kind of taking its neck into its mouth, and then what they'll do, because it's usually bigger, definitely going to be something that bigger than a kitten that they killed for themselves. They can take, say, a deer carcass and straddle it. They'll straddle it, hold it by the neck, straddle it, and then just walk over it. And you can see drag marks through the snow. I've got photographs that somebody in this part of the state took and sent on to me that they couldn't figure out what was going on there, and that was it. Also, it's sort of interesting because there's a difference between and if you don't have a strong stomach, maybe you don't want to listen to this one, but there's a difference between jaguars and the mountain lions in what they prefer to take from a carcass. And the mountain lion will first of all, it'll reach in and it'll take any of the fur that it can get and just sort of bite and chew all the fur off, because it doesn't like to eat the fur. And then it will take the heart and the liver first. And sometimes to do this, it has to kind of saw off with its real sharp incisors part of usually it's the right limb of the creature, and I've got pictures of this that show it. When it's a jaguar, their favorite things to take are the ears and the tongue. And so say if you came upon a carcass that you'd kind of scared a jaguar off of it, you would see the tongue and the ears taken off. Sometimes the eyes, they go for the different parts. So when you find something that looks like it could be a hybrid between a jaguar and the mountain lion, sometimes you will find like a hybrid kill where the chest is opened, the heart and the liver are taken out, and then also the ears and the tongue are gone. And they look exactly like the UFO mutilations that you see left over. Very, and made with a fine. People will say, well, it looked like a surgeon's scalpel was used. Well, they can protrude their first digit on their paws to be slightly larger and sharper than, which they are slightly larger and sharper, and they can use it that way. That's why many times you'll find the leg missing, just cut off perfectly, and that's what they've used. And so when you find something where all of those are the favorite things, you start wondering if that could be a hybrid that combined the preferences of each animal.
Yeah, and I suppose that brings animal mutilations into a whole different field, because obviously that has for decades, Linda, been well established in the world of ufology, hasn't it, really?
Right.
Right. In most cases, anyway. I know I've come across a strange one. And yet, here we have a normal creature that, I mean, I've always found it interesting, especially when we talk about the situation in the UK, because a lot of people just assume that they'll prey on livestock, mostly sheep, but they don't like wool. And they think it's too much hassle, so they tend to go after deer. So in this area, what's the deer population like, Linda? Is it quite a large one? Is it a migratory one?
Oh, it's very high. It's very high. You may have noticed in the documentary that there's one place showing about seven or so deer frolicking, jumping over a fence and stuff, and that was taken by the filmographer, my son. We were driving through and saw them and pulled over, and he got those shots himself, and they're very representative of very large deer populations, definitely.
Yeah. Does there seem to be a kind of seasonal correlation with sightings? Are they more likely to be seen in autumn or spring or summer, or is it all the year round, Linda, in your investigation into this?
Well, I think the sightings are more plentiful, like in the spring. The last one we had in early spring, when there are deer fawns, about, and everything just kind of starts stirring again after the cold winter, at least in Wisconsin, and I don't know, that may be different in other populations like the ones out west, but it does. I did want to also mention too about the weird thing, because there's obviously some other thing that's going on here in this little area around Hillsborough that isn't happening. It isn't like this around the whole state, or in some of the other states either. But I keep coming back to that rose quartzite ridge, and to have such a strong magnetic substance covering so much of the ground and sort of aimed that way, it caused other phenomena that are getting into the UFO. We keep mentioning that every once in a while, and there are unknown identified object things, more than you would believe, that have occurred in that area, if you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah,
because these are early.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, this area seems to be one of these wonderful window areas that we stumble across, and yet there seems to be a wide variety of phenomena. Primarily, we've been talking about the big cats and the official refusal to accept that they're there, but essentially, it's not just that. I mean, you've got a variety of strange things going on, and do you think that this is primarily linked to this geological formation in the area, Linda?
I don't know exactly how it would be linked to it. Other than that, it would seem to be almost bound to change the electromagnetic measurings and readings in that whole area, because it's such a dominant. Where do you find such a dominant amount of unusual quartz? It's just a very to me, if you were going to look at anything in a geographical or geological sense and say what's out of place here, it would have to be that quartz, because a lot of places have rivers, the usual plants that grow along rivers, the rocks that line a canyon, that kind of thing. But to have a huge, giant amount of quartz just sitting there that's been there longer, that all of this habitat has grown up around, because the quartz was there since forever, the formation of the earth almost. And so, to me, if you're going to look for something unusual to assist all these phenomena in appearing, that would be something to see, because we had not only UFOs but unexplained air crashes, and Hillsborough has never been on any air corridor.
Yeah, because I know in your book there's a really interesting case, and one of the reasons it sticks out is, I don't know if you do this, Linda, but I always do, and I'm always really intrigued when I find a strange incident that occurs on my birthday, whether or not it happened whilst I was alive or not. And there's a crash that happened on the 14th of September 1958, where 4 people were killed. I believe they were flying from River Falls in Wisconsin. But when the rescuers got there, they said the plane resembled a rolled up piece of paper. It looked like a ball.
Yeah, and how do you explain that? You know, they said, I think, there was one in these 4 people were from River Falls, yeah, and the plane was rolled up like a ball, so it hit the ground at full blast. I mean, it didn't just cruise into it, it just slammed into it. It was a Piper Tri-Pacer aircraft, and some were thinking that it ran out of fuel, but if it's less and less fuel, why would it slam and then roll into a ball?
Yeah. And I always find that perplexing, that surely if you're an experienced pilot, one of the first things you're going to check is you've got enough fuel to get where you're going, surely. Right.
Right, you would think.
You would hope.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not a one-off, though. There seems to be numerous weird plane crashes, as though there's something strange going on in the area, because planes, not that it happens a lot, but it happens enough to make you think, this is unusual. Right,
exactly, because it was about... 6 years later, September 9th, 1963, a crash killed, they had the mayor of Streator, Illinois, a good-sized little city there, was in the plane, and 2 others, and their small aircraft fell out of a heavy rainstorm about 5 miles to the ground just south of Hillsborough, and they figured that it had hit a vertical air squall, which made something like a small tornado, and then that tornado slammed the airplane down right onto a farm of a man named Raymond Nemitz. And then about half a year later, another plane went down a mile and a half from that one on the Nemitz farm. Equally mysterious. It was March 26, 1964. A National Guard F-89 Scorpion jet fighter slammed into a field, again, that slamming thing, on the Rudolph Penshorn farm near Wanawak, missing the barn by 15 feet, while the farm's owner slept through the entire crash. Even that guy was a heavy sleeper. Luckily, the 2 pilots were able to eject and land safely. But there was the family members said that the military kept a military cordon around the crash area for 2 weeks and wouldn't let anybody there because they were searching the wreck for what they said that they called possible devices similar to dynamite caps. But nobody ever found out if that was actual true. They never found any such bombs. And I think that was the last. Well, there have been a few newer ones, but there seemed to be in the 40s through 60s this ongoing phenomenon of airplanes almost being like hurled to the ground was how it looked and felt to people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know in your chapter, when you focus on this area, there is a remarkable story just that occurs obviously in the height of the UFO frenzy that followed. Obviously, this happened in 1948, the year after Kenneth Arnold's infamous sighting out up in Washington State, where people reported seeing what they described as flying fence posts.
Yeah, that was the name that they used, and we were able to interview a man who was one of the witnesses. He was like 10 years old when it happened, and it was his dad and then another farmer on an adjacent farm. They both ran in to report what they saw to the newspaper office at the same time because they had seen it on their separate farms. Each explanation of it meshed exactly with the others. And what they said was there were 2 things that looked like vertical cigars at first, and they were they were seen. Let me find this exact little description that they said. The newspaper reported each was a long tapering cylinder with a slightly bulbous head and a fantail of light, colored gas or mist. So, and mind you, this wasn't like two guys that made it up together. They were each coming, goggle-eyed, sweating out of their minds because they had seen this thing that they never saw before. And while they watched the fence post sail through the sky, the object suddenly appeared to slack in speed and to turn up on end, so they stood vertically. Now, and they're doing all this in perfect synchronization. And you can guarantee that nobody in 1948 has seen anything like that. So it wasn't like something that was on TV or well known. At that stage, the fence post appeared to be floating in the air rather than speeding like a rocket or torpedo. The strange craft then continued to move away from the northwest at a slower speed, still in tandem, still upright, until they were out of sight. And guess where they were headed straight for was Wildcat Mountain. It's just
I mean, the perplexing thing about that is one of the things that often gets thrown at some of the early UFO reports, Linda, especially, or UAPs as they're now known, is that everybody goes, oh yeah, people, according to certain people, everybody in America went to the cinema in the 40s and 50s, which I've always found a very simplistic, one of those explanations that it seems to one size fits all. And clearly a lot of these people haven't seen some of these films because they're awful. And if everybody had gone to see them, we'd have had a lot more of them, because they would have been, $1 million successes. These would have been very big hits, if according to certain skeptics. So, yet here we are, 70 years later, and there's nothing we're aware of that even resembles that today. So,
no.
And it doesn't match the furore at the time, because obviously after the, like I say, the year before is the official sort of ground zero for UFO sightings in North America. It doesn't resemble anything that seemed to be being reported anywhere else either. It stands out because it's a very unique sighting with multiple witnesses on a clear day.
Right. They just stood there. They had a very good long look at it as it just, almost floated across, especially when it went vertical. They had the sensation it was more floating, like it was slowing down to do something. And sure enough, it went right to that mountain. And, it makes you wonder. I mean, of course, my imagination just goes wild, but, was there something under that mountain? That's the thing that occurs to me, is if the ground is so electromagnified by that ridge, and then the mountain is right there, could there have been something underneath that they were interested in? And could that be the reason that area wardens, game wardens, and people like that are so anxious to keep knowledge of what's in that area from the general public, like mountain lions?
Yeah.
Inside, it just sort of, the weirdest thing to me, though, of course, was the fact that there was another UFO story that didn't come to me from Steve Stanek, whom I've given all the major kudos to. I dedicated the whole book to him just because of this chapter. But my maternal grandmother that I mentioned earlier, that lived about 18 miles away, saved a letter that was written to her by a woman who became her German pen pal. And she was trying to help this woman get out of, the woman had contacted her. The woman was a very educated person who worked in one of the Nazi North Sea air and sea stations that they had. Yeah. And so somehow this woman was desperate to get out of Germany. I won't go through the whole connection thing, but the woman one time wrote my grandmother a letter that I print. It's in the book. You can see it. She was talking about UFOs, and she was saying, "Oh, what do you think about UFOs?" Now, my grandmother's a wonderful woman with a 5th grade education. I don't think she even knew what a UFO was.
Yeah.
And this woman was a highly trained and educated person. I met her once after this all happened. But she said, well, of course the Russians brag that they made them, but we know that's not true. We know now they're real, and they look like this. And she drew a little pencil picture of what looked kind of like, more like a bell shape than the classic 2 saucers together, but showed what they were. Why would she write that and send that to my grandmother who lived in Hillsborough?
Mm.
The whole thing, it's just too fantastical to believe, but it keeps getting stranger and stranger the more I learn about the whole place.
Absolutely. And that's unusual as well, because obviously it's well known that one of the weird things that happened during the Second World War was the appearance of what became known as the Foo Fighters, because the Nazis thought they were ours, and we all thought they were the Nazis. And yet here we have a letter from somebody working for them at the time, who basically says, well, we thought they were Russians, but we know they're not. So what on earth were they?
Yeah, exactly. And what's the connection to Wildcat Mountain or the big quartzite hill? It's just kind of, and when you drive around there, you can drive out, you get outside the city of Baraboo, and you start seeing this ridge, and the ridge just goes and goes and goes, and you just wonder how it got that form and why it's shaped right there. There's also the fact, I'll just mention quickly, but it seems to tie into every weird thing that there is just about, is that the entire southern half of Wisconsin was covered, at the time the settlers came, almost completely covered with these raised flat sculptures of different ceremonial animals. And the whole place looked like a park that had been kept that way because the Native Americans who lived, they said they did not build these things, but they revered them as very sacred. They corresponded quite a bit to the Ho-Chunk tribe's totem system that they still have today. And they were considered essential to the health and well-being of the planet. And they burned out all the brush, so there wasn't all the weedy under stuff like there is today. They burned out the brush. They kept these things manicured. Most of them, unfortunately, were taken out with farming. But you can find really nice, well-kept parks and see what they were like in places like Sheboygan. And Whitewater has a nice one. And in Madison, there's a 150-foot wide sculpture of a thunderbird across one of the hills near the campus. So it's this entire mystic region that has these stories around it. It has the unusual manifestations, and the manifestations just seem to keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think where I saw one, and they rediscovered one, which was essentially like a serpent, Linda. And that was the same kind of thing that the local natives said, well, it was here when we got here, and we've looked after it. And I think it's only recently that they've done some ground-penetrating radar, and they'd missed a whole coil of this giant serpent, and it's enormous. I mean, it's beautifully maintained. I would suspect it's clearly a very special place for people.
Right.
And I'm a little mystified that there's not more about these things, because these are incredible earthworks, essentially, to some purpose that we don't understand. Yeah, and there's a really good book that came out about 10 years ago about the ones in southern Wisconsin and their best thoughts of them. But there is quite a bit of mythology that's kind of coming back. Some scholars, Native American scholars too, have been busy trying to preserve as many of these as they can. A lot of them were actually surveyed in the official original state surveys. The men put them into that, or we would have known about many fewer of them than we do now. But the site of it, that it's in this site in southern half of Wisconsin,
And we also have the Beast of Bray Road that I wrote about first that got me into all of this. I've actually recently discovered, because I could never find anything that special about that particular road. And I did have a let's see, what would we call it? Somebody who specializes in psychic examinings of things. Told me that there was iron under this road, and I actually, by peering at old papers from the Elkhorn Library and looking at it, I realized that the spot where most of the sightings occurred in Bray Road would be the center of, if you could imagine, a giant medicine wheel laid in the land, each of the spokes dating to another area of small lakes that were all used, I found out, as sacred paths and just regular traffic paths to the native people who were there at the time. So maybe there's more in the geology than I'm able to tell. Maybe the geology is the whole key to what's around Hillsborough, the pink quartzite, the low sculptures, the effigy mounds, I should say, and all of this mythology about the freshwater springs, because that's the other thing these lake areas are loaded with, are the freshwater springs that seem to be crucial. So maybe it's all there in front of us, and we just don't have the know-how to connect the dots.
Yeah. I mean, it is weird that there does seem to be these places up and down the United States, Linda, where there's a whole range of weird phenomena that just seem centralised in certain areas, as we've talked about the area around Hillsborough today. But, there are plenty of areas up and down. I mean, obviously the Bridgewater Triangle is probably one of the most famous, where that just seems to be a whole hodgepodge of cryptids, big cats, UFOs, ghosts, pugwatches, strange creatures living in Hockamont Swamp. There's a whole variety of weird phenomena, and it seems that there are notable sites in the US especially that seems to be a magnet for just a variety of weird phenomena. It doesn't seem to be just ghosts or just cryptids or just UFOs. It's a bit of everything.
Yeah, no, not at all. And well, I think I summed it up. I said the weird nature of the huge fence post-shaped objects traveling in the sky, the 14 years of air disasters that included 2 military craft wreaking havoc over one small community, and then the appearance of animals said not to exist in that geographical area, such as great cats sporting black fur, feels mythic. Even if it isn't somehow, it just feels, when you go and you drive around and you see all these things, it just feels that way. Plus there's the presence of Amish people, very high population. So you've got this click-clack on the roads that feel like they're really from the past, and people dressed in the old-fashioned, that you see them in their Sunday buggies driving around. So it's like a land from another time, basically.
Yeah, incredible. It certainly seems to be a gateway to something. I'm not sure what, but there's certainly something odd going on there, and it just seems to span a variety of phenomena. It's very, very strange.
Right, it is. So, and then there are other, it's not the only chapter. I do want to. It occupies 2 chapters in the I Know What I Saw, and I'm hoping. I thought a lot of people would be really, really interested in this subset of weird big dogs that are huge dogs that I've been keeping track. I started getting reports of those right away in 1992 when people started writing me, and a lot of them I didn't publish because I didn't know where to classify them, with their weirdness. And I finally did with this book, and I ended up calling them not dire wolves because they're different than wolves, but dire dogs. And so that's something maybe we can get into in another talk, because again, it's these really odd creatures that with certain phenomena, and these are spookier in a lot of ways. They really act in ways that frighten people, and they're very large, and they like to chase people's cars and run them off the road if they can. And that's not like the mythology for teenagers, that started, I think, with buggies parking in the woods.
Yes.
It's nothing like that. It's people are seeing these things out on the road actively, and they're chasing cars, catching up with them, and running alongside them, and that they don't always look like wolves. They've got some dog characteristics, and people will describe them as either the size of a Shetland pony or a bull calf, a large bull calf, which is huge for a canine. So, there's so much.
Yeah, it's a fantastic chapter, that one, and it's one obviously that's very interesting to me because obviously we have a very long tradition here in the UK of such creatures.
Right, the black dogs. Yeah,
and in my obviously up and down the UK they are known as different names. We've got things like the black shuck is probably the most common name, but where I live in Yorkshire they're known as barghasts.
Yes, I've heard that name too. Yeah, and I've got a little book called Cat Flaps, Northern Mystery Cats by Andy Roberts.
Yes,
with a foreword by Richard Freeman, and he talks about these black dogs that he says the mystery cat. Some people think that the black dog and the black mystery cats are the same thing. And I think he's begging to disagree here with that. But again, that's what we've got in Wisconsin too. Black dogs, the black mystery cats. It's like there's a big invisible bridge from the UK right into Wisconsin. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe there is.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the portal. Maybe there's a portal. Wouldn't that be something?
Nothing surprises me. I mean, I've always found that aspect, Linda, quite interesting because obviously. A lot of these areas in the US are populated by a lot of European immigrants. So when I've talked about black cats in the US, I've always found this quite an interesting thing that tradition and folklore coming from Europe would lend itself for these experiences to be more like dogs, because we don't really. I mean, obviously we have a strange thing going on in the UK with mystery big cats being seen, but the folklore element, there is none in regards to large cats, but it's all large dogs, and therefore I found it really interesting that if you're going to say it's just a modern interpretation of folklore or an urban myth, people should be seeing large dogs everywhere, not large cats.
Right.
So
right, that's a good point.
It's interesting, and no doubt I'll get an email from Richard as we've mentioned him again. I think I'll have to put him on commission. He seems to get mentioned every other week.
Send one to Andy too. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Andy's someone I've met a couple of times as well. So yeah, it's friends of friends. It's a small world here in the UK cryptozoology scene. So Linda, what else have you got planned other than obviously I believe the film's going to come to a general release hopefully soon.
Yeah, we're hoping within the month. My son decided to redo all the audio in it, and he had to put in the closed captioning, and you have to have all this, to qualify for Amazon Prime. So we're hoping to get that. Just kind of keep an eye out for it. We're hoping within the next couple of weeks. He's just about there, finishing up the closed captioning. And you can always go to lindagodfrey.com, which is my blog, where you'll find lots of things. I've got a real strange mystery thing going on on the deck of my own house that I described there. Yes. But you can find pictures of, just kind of look around for the mentions of the return to Wildcat Mountain, and you'll find streaming links that you can stream it for now.
Yeah, brilliant. So, I recommend it highly. It's a cracking film, and congratulations to you all. And I believe you won first place at the Midwest Weird Fest with it as well.
We did first place in documentaries. We were there were some really good entries there, and we hadn't even considered. We were just happy to have gotten into it. So for our first film, and it's just like I said, it was me, my youngest son, the videographer, and it's a very, very good filmmaker. He's been working on these things for a long time, and my husband, and Steve Stanek was part of the expedition, so it was a really mini shoestring of a crew, and it's just, I think we all believed in the subject so much. And I think that I do even more having spent the time with these people. When you see this is what everybody remarks on, is the quality of these people who wanted to go on and talk about it. What you say, people have said, did you hire actors? They're so believable, you know. And they are. They're just salt of the earth people, but they certainly aren't actors. You know, that would they laugh when they hear that, but
yeah. Well, clearly they feel passionate enough, Linda, that they don't care about coming forwards. And to be fair, like I say, when you hear these people speak, you believe them, because it's very obvious that they've seen what they've seen.
Right, and we've got, you know, former sheriff's deputy, former game warden specialist. You know, we have a woman who worked with the very renowned Florida Panther Association, trying to restore the Black Panthers to the state of Florida, who has like, I don't know, 16 PhDs, something like that. You know, so they're not only just ordinary people going about their business, they're professionals who have the ability and the knowledge to talk and think about these things and really contribute, I think, in a big way to the dialogue about these animals.
Absolutely. Right. Well, I'll certainly look forward to that, and obviously you'll update us on your blog when you get the green light. And before I mention the book is about to be released, one last thing I want to touch on, and you mentioned it there. I was going to ask you about this, because obviously I regularly keep up to date with your blog, Linda, and obviously...
Thank you.
You've been having some strange things left on your porch, and I know recently there's been a bit of an update. So, for anybody who doesn't know, do you want to give a brief synopsis about what's been happening? Well,
this and actually the final thing came out. I mean, it was from the UK. It turns out, in Scotland. So there's a big. It was like a Scotland Daily newspaper. I can't think of the name of it. But yeah, it was last November when I walked out on my house deck, and my backyard isn't big, but it backs up to a nature conservancy that circles the city and then splays out across the countryside in different directions. So a lot of animals go around it. So I kind of pay attention to that part of the yard. Well, lying on my deck were 5 white landscaping pebbles, about an inch and a half maybe each, that were set in a very definite, complete and tidy shape of a pentagon. And there's nobody. It was November. Nobody was using the backyards for anything. It was too late to mow. I did not know where those things came from. I took pictures. I messed around with them. And took other pictures. Like I dissociated them. I added a little figure. And then when I came and kind of just laid them side by side, and when I came back, the little figure had been laid on top of one of the rocks. Just weird things. And I just was driving myself crazy trying to find out the origin of what that might have meant. Well, I just came across, it was a few weeks ago, and just by pure accident came across this newspaper article from Scotland, and there were several versions of it, but they were pretty much all the same. And it said that these were burglar markings, that when burglars were going around through a neighborhood, just like the traveling hobos did during the Great Depression, they'd hop on trains and then they'd get off the train and they'd look for a mark that said where they could get a hot meal, which people would let them sleep in the barn, that, etc. It was the same thing, only this was where, which were the best houses to burgle in the neighborhood. And, I'll tell you, the pay grade of people who write about unknown animals is not large, so our house is no big thing to look at or anything. I couldn't figure out why we had gotten it. And it turns out that that's what they are. And there was a perfectly drawn pentagon that looked exactly like the one on my porch, and I included photos with it where you can go back, you can read the article. Kensington is the name that's coming to my mind of the news, but I could be wrong. But it's there. There's a copy of it you can see. So it's kind of unusual to actually solve some sort of thing, but I didn't like this because, sort of urging, it said, I had to laugh, both my husband and I laughed, because the meaning of the Pentagon is supposed to be wealthy, which, we've got a porch that is literally barely standing and was going to be our summer. We made the movie instead of fixing our back deck. Basically, there's a big hole. Your foot can go right through it. Yeah. And, it's just a very ordinary little tri-level house. So we got a big laugh over that. But anyway.
I think, to be honest, Linda, I'd rather make a film than do DIY, so I'm with you completely there.
Thank you. Yeah. And, if my husband was just as much with it as, of course, our son was, yeah. And he lives in Milwaukee, where he's got access to a lot of things. But we just went with our hearts and made the film, and I'm hoping it will mean a lot to the people who see it.
Yeah, well, I recommend it, Hannah. It's a fabulous film, and another welcome addition to your canon, Linda.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it was a joy.
Yeah. So, as we touched on, I Know What I Saw is being released as a paperback this summer. I believe it's August, is it, Linda?
Yes, it's coming out from the publisher in the beginning of August as a paperback book, and so that'll make it lighter and a little easier to cart around, and it's just another way for people to get and enjoy the book, I guess.
Absolutely, I recommend it highly. Obviously, I got it when it came out last year, because I'm too impatient to wait for paperback copies these days, Linda. So before I let you go, what is there anything else on your agenda coming up? Have you got something else you're working on? Is the Dogman pulling you back?
Well, I do have a theory I'm working on for the next maybe final book that I'm trying to get done. I had 5 or 6 conferences lined up to speak at over the past several months, and the door slammed on all of those, like the day after we got home from that Eau Claire Weird Fest. Yeah. And so all of those are done. I sadly heard that one of my favorites, the one up in northeastern Michigan in the UP, had to call it off. They were holding out. So probably not in terms of conferences, and I'm hoping the virus goes away soon, because everybody who participates in those things, you just lose so much when you lose a year. Yeah. All the people you don't see, all the connections you didn't get to make, the ideas you didn't receive or share. So I just I pray for everybody out there listening that we will all get through this together, and it will come out all for the good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no doubt we'll keep an eye on your upcoming work, and as always, I'll look forward to anything you've got in the pipeline, Linda. So,
thank you.
Before I let you go, where can everybody keep up to date and find your blog and chase down your books on Amazon, most of them?
Sure. The main place is always my blog, which is lindagodfrey.com. No WWs. It's a blog, in its own right. So just lindagodfrey.com. And I'm also on Facebook as Linda S. Godfrey. I don't understand how this works, but it says author at the back of it sometimes. But if it doesn't, don't worry. As long as it seems like it's me, it should have my picture there. So, what can you do these days?
Absolutely.
So those are probably the easiest places, and you'll find everything there. I'll just leave it at that.
Absolutely. Well, I'll put links to everything as usual in the show notes, Linda. And as always, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you again. Thank you again, and hopefully I won't keep it so long next time, especially as you mentioned the dire dogs. We'll have to try and arrange something sooner rather than later, if that's all right with yourself.
Sure, I'd love to. Yeah, take a look at that, because these are unpublished stories, most of them, and you put them together and you get a sense that, there's this other whole major thing, and we can speculate about that some more, because I think those will show up in the next book too.
Absolutely. Well, fabulous. Well, listen, I recommend both the documentary. It's a wonderful film, and like I say, I've mentioned it a couple of times, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. So congratulations to everybody involved. And obviously the book will be released in paperback But obviously, if you're like me and you're very impatient, you can get it in hardback now, available on Amazon. So, Linda, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. You and your family take care and stay safe, and thank you for speaking to me.
And thanks to you and all of your listeners.